Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 4.2a, and we are going to shift our focus now from the origins and rise of independence movements to now focusing on methods used during the independence movement. So the next two lessons are going to be all about methods. So by the end of this particular lesson, which is 2a, you should be able to describe the role that nonviolent protest played and the role that ZAPU played in nonviolence in Zimbabwe's independence movement. And we'll explain what ZAPU is later, I promise. Secondly, explain the role of armed struggle and how tensions between ZAPU and ZANU illustrated armed struggle. And again, we will also explain to you what ZANU is. Thirdly, describe how guerrilla warfare impacted the independence movement of Zimbabwe. And lastly, explain how the Lancaster House talks led to Zimbabwe's independence. So in taking a look at the methods that were used, that's what we're focusing on, is the methods that are used in Zimbabwe's independence movement. We're going to look at the role that nonviolent protest played. Okay, so this is all this slide is going to talk about. Now, S-Rank, which stands for Southern Rhodesian African National Congress, just a reminder, is going to rebrand itself in the late 1970s, and in late 1950s and 1957, when it merges with a group called the City Youth League. And the City Youth League was a militant group that was led by this gentleman here, who is Joshua Nkomo. Now, S-Rank, when I say it's rebranded itself, it's S-Rank was often with the city elite or the urban elite, the very small black educated elite group. That was one of the problems that S-Rank had, was that it was not able to connect with other groups within the black population that are not, did not have access to the opportunities that these individuals had. And so now this rebranding, you get this more militant group. So you're starting to expand your support base, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. And all of that's going to be under Nkomo's leadership. So Southern Rhodesian government will ban S-Rank again in 1959. So they rebranded themselves in 57. They started having peaceful protests. They really were having nonviolent protests. So the Southern Rhodesian government banned them in 1959. This caused a lot more turmoil. So as a result, in 1960, Joshua Nkomo is going to create the National Democratic Party in 1960. So it's basically the same thing. It's just the group S-Rank regrouped itself and called itself the National Democratic Party, and it too was banned in 1961. So anytime that this group of individuals does anything, the Southern Rhodesian white minority government bans it. So that takes us to 1962, and literally, just so you know, the group was disbanded or banned in December of 1961. Literally the very next month in 1962, in January of 1962, the same group created ZAPU, which stands for the Zimbabwe African People's Union. And that was led by the president, Joshua Nkomo, again here, and Secretary Robert Mugabe. That name is going to be sounding familiar because this person actually ended up becoming the president of Zimbabwe. And of course, there is division within ZAPU as well, just like there's division with S-Rank because you had the whole stuff up here with the City Youth League. But there is division within ZAPU because the question is, do you want to gain independence through a constitutional solution like negotiation with Great Britain, which is what Nkomo suggested, or do you want to take a more radical route and become more activist and sabotage, like blowing up bridges and power plants and those type of things, blowing and destroying infrastructure, not terrorist acts. Don't think of it that. It's not killing innocent civilians. That's not what they were trying to go for, but it was just sabotaging economic assets to raise a point. So now we're going to shift our focus to the role of armed struggle. So now we're going to see tensions breaking up within the black community in Zimbabwe, because this is going to be ZANU versus a new group called ZAPU. Now, we've already talked about ZANU, and even though Joshua Nkomo and ZAPU had taken a more radical stance, that they're starting to encourage a little bit of sabotage or more slightly violent action, if I can describe sabotage as slightly violent, more people began to realize that that wasn't really the cause that they wanted to go to. They wanted more radicalism. So that is the creation of this group, which is the opposite group, which is ZANU, the Zimbabwe African National Union. And this was led by Robert Mugabe. And this is him right here. Look, this is his photograph here. And of course, like I said, he's going to eventually become the president of Zimbabwe at the very end of this. So this man you're going to hear a lot more about. But the difference between ZANU and ZAPU is more, it's not just a difference between should we be more radical or should we be more constitutional in our approach to independence. It actually illustrated some cultural dynamics because ZANU generally represented Shona-speaking individuals, while ZAPU generally represented the Ndebele. And remember, these are two African tribal groups that have been living in this area for millennia. So this is their region, and these groups are basically splintering off into two different subsets. And they also are divided geographically, like ZANU was largely in the east, ZAPU was largely based in the west. And none of that really mattered, though, because, you know, under Prime Minister Ian Smith in 1964, they were banned, so they were closed down anyway. And so once they were banned, they actually started imprisoning some of the leaders. So as a result of that, you're going to see once they imprison the leaders and the Ian Smith government starts to take a hardline approach to this, you're going to see both groups start forming militia groups. So ZAPU is going to create a group called the Zimbabwe People's Revolutionary Army, or ZIPRA, and ZANU is going to create their militia group known as Zimbabwe African National Liberation Army. Now, don't freak out. Here's the way to recognize this. Get your N's together. ZANU, ZANLA. Get your P's together. ZAPU, ZIPRA. Okay, so that's how you remember which group goes to which. So don't panic about that. That's how you get that. But the last thing that we need to notice about these two groups, though, is that this is also showing a difference and an increase in international support in here, because the Soviet Union is going to provide support for ZIPRA, and they actually advocate for the Zimbabwe independence movement to be led by an uprising by urban workers, very similar to the Soviet Union's rise to communism. But ZANLA is going to get all their financial support from Communist China, which believes that you should do the uprising by rural peasants, which is exactly how Mao was being able to be successful there. So this is showing a difference now between these two groups as well. So now that we have established militias because the Rhodesian government has imprisoned the leaders of ZAPU and ZANU and banned those organizations, now their militias are running amok. Now, all the militia groups, you know, since they are now being chased after, they went into other countries bordering Zimbabwe. And so one of those groups is ZANU guerrillas. They're going to they're going to run to Zambia for support. And so once they gather their forces in Zambia, they're going to cross back into Rhodesia, but they're going to be quickly crushed by the Rhodesian army, which is the white minority army, and they have better supplies and weapons and things like that. So that's one of the reasons why they were smaller in number, but they had better supplies. ZAPU, on the other hand, is attacking urban targets. And so they're actually, you know, attempting to blow up power plants and bridges. Power lines is a big one that they were going after. And of course, the Rhodesian front forces are wearing thin. So Rhodesian, the military, there's only so many white people. You have to remember that. There's not that many white people in Zimbabwe, and there's only so many white men. And those are the only ones that fight in the army. So they're wearing very, very thin. So as a result, we still have a white-dominated government down south, and that's South Africa. And so South Africa actually does send troops to help the white minority government. So you're going to see white South African troops crossing in the border into Rhodesia to help the white minority government. Now, ZANLA, which is the ZANU group, they actually control the countryside. So those are the people, just like Mao. Remember, this is the same group that's getting support from China. So just like Mao, they're teaching people political thought and theory, just like Mao did. And they're giving people an idea to fight for. And as a result, in 1972, they're going to coordinate several attacks on white farmers. Remember, they control the countryside, so that's where their focus on attacks are, in the rural areas. ZAPU is going for urban targets. ZANU is going for rural targets, such as farmers. This leads to guerrilla warfare. Now there's open guerrilla warfare where both militias are fighting for the same cause, but they have different backers and different intentions and different beliefs on how the government should be set up after independence. As a result of all the increase in guerrilla warfare going on throughout Rhodesia, the Smith government is going to definitely take a hardline stance and try to crush these rebellions. They're going to actually make attacks in Zimbabwe. They're going to go across the border and actually physically go after guerrilla fighters in Zambia. So they're literally attacking another nation. They will eventually close the border between Zambia and Zimbabwe. So it's right there on the map where I'm drawing on the blue. Then they actually also start attacking Mozambique because they have guerrilla bases in Mozambique, and so they actually start doing air attacks and things like that in Mozambique. So South Africa, of course, at this point is a regional leader in this whole area, and so they're very, very worried about the stability of this region, and it's only because of this whole nonsense that's going on in Zimbabwe in the white minority-led government. But, of course, South Africa has its own issues with apartheid, but, of course, it's much stronger militarily and economically. So it is a regional leader, and it's very concerned about the instability. Now, Rhodesia doesn't have enough men to fight because it's a white government, and so they just don't have enough sources to continue fighting this. And so on the flip side of that, you see the white population dwindling, especially through the warfare, but then there's constant infighting between both ZANU and ZANLA, so between the political organization and the military or the militia of the same political group, there's now infighting between these two groups. And there's a power struggle that leaves Mugabe in charge. And so he is now going to be in total control of both ZANU and ZANLA, and his forces are going to be centered right here in Mozambique. Now, the frontline states, this is a term you definitely need to know. The frontline states are Mozambique, Zambia, Botswana, Angola, and Tanzania. And so all of these states are calling for unity among all to bring down the Smith government. This is the early beginnings that you're starting to see unity among the black population in this particular region of Africa. And it's highly important because if you think about it, these are all black-led governments that are insisting upon unity among the black community to actually bring down a white minority government led right here in Zimbabwe. And so this is highly impressive and a very much of a positive shift towards the black community in supporting their freedom. As the armed struggle continues on through guerrilla warfare, you have to know where these places are located and who's coming from whom. And so ZIPRA, that particular militia, is located in Zambia and in Botswana. And so they're actually going to attack Zimbabwe from Zambia and Botswana. ZANLA, on the other side, is located more in Mozambique, and they're actually going to be attacking Zimbabwe from Mozambique. So literally, Zimbabwe, or Rhodesia at the time, is completely surrounded, basically, by guerrilla operatives continuously attacking it. Tensions are mounting within the Rhodesian government, and there's actually talks of overthrowing Prime Minister Smith and getting rid of him and trying to find a new white prime minister. From 1977, there is massive disruption to infrastructure within Rhodesia. There's massive amounts of airplane bombings, oil tanker explosions, industrial explosions, attacks on camps and farms. So literally anything and everything that these militia groups, both ZIPRA and ZANLA, can get a hold of, they're actually attacking and trying to destroy. By 1979, the guerrilla forces are on the verge of victory because the white minority simply can no longer sustain fighting because they're running low on resources, because there's an embargo against them, the global community no longer supports them, and they just simply cannot continue going forward any further. So we're getting to see the end, and Zimbabwe's about to become independent. Now, a couple of other things to consider. So these are other factors that are going to influence the methods. So we're talking about methods. So other factors and other methods that are going to assist in Zimbabwe's movement. So first of all, let's look at Mozambique. Mozambique's independence. Mozambique was a colony of Portugal. And so once they gained independence, the group Frelimo is going to become in charge of Mozambique. So that's now their government. And it is a socialist-led government, by the way. They helped train guerrilla fighters there. So Mozambique gained independence in 1975, the year I was born. And so Freelimos controlled it now, and they're helping train guerrilla fighters. On the flip side of the same coin, however, South Africa and Zimbabwe, so South Africa is a white minority government, Zambia is a black majority government, they both agree that a ceasefire should be as quickly as possible because they want stability in the region. But South Africa is very, very afraid of Mozambique because it is a socialist nation with majority rule. So Mozambique is a black-run country that is socialist, and of course South Africa is capitalist, and they're fearful of socialism and all that bunch of stuff because this is the Cold War after all. And then on top of that, Angola just got independence from Portugal as well, and it also became a socialist state. So we have two socialist states in southern Africa that is causing South Africa a lot of, fear. And the Soviet Union and China influenced the region in this, they're getting more and more influence in this region. It's causing a lot of fear in the West. So talks between, unfortunately, Rhodesia and black leaders began to fail because even though the white minority is barely in control, they're still being kind of about about talking. And so since they fall apart, there's tremendous, and I do mean tremendous, international pressure applied to both black leaders and the southern Rhodesia, or excuse me, the white minority government in Rhodesia to resume talks, and eventually they will do so. And this will lead to eventual independence. So with the increase in international pressure, eventually parties will come together, and this is a picture of the parties coming together in London at the Lancaster House talks. And this is where a ceasefire among ZIPRA and ZANLA will actually officially take place, and further negotiations will commence. Things that are decided at this particular meeting are the Ian Smith government surrendered independence to a transitional government. So what this means is that the white minority government will no longer be in charge. There's now going to be a transitional government to lead us into independence. Elections will be held in 1980. By the way, this meeting is happening in 1979. So the very next year, 1980, they will hold elections with all parties represented, both white and black. So everybody's going to have equal access to seats and equal access to voting. The union between ZAPU and ZANU, once this ceasefire goes into effect, it completely breaks apart, and they are now going to compete as two different political parties. So they kind of changed their names, and this is, I kid you not, as unique as they get. They actually changed them to ZAPU PF, which means, ZAPU Patriotic Front, or PF ZANU, Patriotic Front ZANU. Okay, so that's the only thing that's different. Well, fast forward to 1980, they actually hold the 1980 elections, and the Rhodesian Front, which is the white minority government, so they actually do gain 20 seats in parliament, and PF ZANU has 57 seats. So there were some negotiations here about the white people giving them a certain number of seats, so they did get a number of seats there, and so, but of course they're not in the majority. This puts Mugabe as the leader of Zimbabwe, and so he becomes the first president of Zimbabwe based on the 1980 election. And there you have it. The first half of the methods used is complete. So our lesson is finished. Can you describe the role that nonviolent protest played and the role that ZAPU played in nonviolence in Zimbabwe's independence? Can you explain the role of armed struggle and how tensions between ZAPU and ZANU illustrated armed struggle? Can you describe how guerrilla warfare impacted the independence movement? And can you explain how the Lancaster House talks led to Zimbabwe's independence? If you can, pat yourself on the back. You did an amazing job. At this point, look for any activity for 4.2a, complete that, and then get over there to lesson 4.2b. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great day.